After getting a little too excited for the high number of female participants in the Formula Winter Series, we can finally talk about a pair of women on the top step of a feeder series podium again. Hello and welcome, fellow motorsports fans. I know, women winning in a women-only series isn't exactly the high point of women in motorsports, but the F1 Academy project remains a critical part of the effort to promote women in racing, so it very much deserves a closer look here, along with all of its flaws. But of course, we'll get to F1, IndyCar and the first round of the IAME Euro Series as well, so let's not waste any more time. F1 Academy was an incredibly mixed bag for a rather highly anticipated opening round, featuring a couple of great drives among mad amounts of chaos and carnage, particularly in the incredibly messy reverse grid race. But despite the messy nature, we can still have a look at some of the key drivers and teams to draw some conclusions for the future. Naturally, Prema as a whole team has to be at the top of this list, considering Dorianne Pin is coming into this season as a more or less overwhelming favourite. At least on paper, I think only Maya Wurch should be able to be a match for her. But as we learned last season, it doesn't always work out like this. It showed in the reverse grid race, where Pin did make some decent progress, but also made a key mistake at the end of the race that would have cost her a position if not for a post-race penalty further ahead. She did look near flawless in the main race though. On the flip side, Tina Hausmann continued everything she showed last year in all the worst ways possible, causing multiple incidents across the two races and thus never even threatening to score a single point. I had high hopes for her last year following her underrated, I have to say, Italian F4 campaign and had not yet fully given up on her even after an abysmal 2024, but this was definitely not good enough for one of only 6 returning drivers and in a top car as well. Prema being a key player as a team, as if we needed any further proof, got underlined by Nina Gademan, or Gademan, I'm trying to figure out the pronunciation, continuing her form from the Formula Winter Series, looking all set to dominate the reverse grid race, only to get screwed by an engine failure in heartbreaking fashion. And by Hausmann in race 2. I didn't rate her all that highly last season in a British F4 effort, but her continued improvement is undeniable and she looks like a good bet for some wins later down the line. Campos also hit the ground running, a trend we see across all series at the moment, but to be honest, they also have a killer lineup if you ask me. Between returning Chloe Chong, rising star Alisha Palmowski and Rafaela Ferreira, they have 3 drivers I'd expect in the points more often than not. And I do hope Palmowski in particular can establish herself as a bit of a dark horse for the title, but that may just be one step too far. Ferreira admittedly wasn't quite that convincing compared to her rapid teammates, but we know the step from Brazilian F4 to European/international competition is a pretty big one. In case you've never watched her race, just wait for her to get a reverse grid pole. She does know how to convert those quite well. Now a couple of notable individuals, and who else could head this list but star rookie Emma Felbermayr. If you've been around the channel, you might have seen me praise her at multiple occasions last year for continued great efforts in both national and international karting, and therefore I couldn't be happier than seeing her take to the F4 car so quickly. She's absolutely one to watch for not just this season, but also when looking further down the line and what women might actually do alright at an F3 sort of level. Similar story, although without me watching her climb the ladder, so I guess less personal excitement for that reason alone, Alba Larsen has also hit the ground running as the youngest member on the grid, and this is exactly the sort of driver we need to actually build that pyramid of female drivers that might one day feed all the way to the top. I think even for the biggest critics of this series, the success should be visible now, improving the grid from a bunch of, no offense, but pretty forgettable drivers to a bunch of young and mostly talented women in just 3 short seasons. And while the driving standards were far from perfect, this unfortunately is an issue prevalent across global F4 competition at the moment and not unique to F1 Academy at all. One last shout out to Nicola Verda, former Formula Regional competitor over in America and has always been good for the occasional impressive drive, so naturally I had some pretty high hopes for her here. I know not many people keep up with the Formula Regional Americas, so in case you didn't pay attention to her this weekend at all, don't get fooled by the double DNF. She got taken out twice, but had some decent pace all weekend, especially compared to her high-tech teammates. Who was the big standout driver for you this weekend? Let us know down in the comments. For the F1 segment, I'll limit myself to just 3 key topics of discussion and a quick shout out for Isaac Hadjar, very much making up for his Melbourne moment. First, the elephant in the room, the Liam Lawson question. I understand all the meme potential around his current performance, but between the jokes, we shouldn't forget that the actual deeper issues of the current Red Bull team. Max Verstappen hasn't been challenged by a teammate in the last 7 years, with Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon and recently Sergio Perez all failing massively. This can't be a coincidence. The Red Bull is either simply not that good or too difficult to drive for normal human beings, even at an F1 level, with the real issue probably being a bit of both if you ask me. Would I like to see Yuki Tsunoda get a go in the car? Of course I would. I think he deserved the seat more in the first place, and Lawson should at least get a full season in the B team before getting promoted. But making the change now will not solve any of the issues Red Bull has been experiencing with that second seat. If anything, it'll just add a stain on Tsunoda's CV for no real reason. Is qualifying on the last row unacceptable even with the current state of the car? Of course, again. But if Verstappen can't drag it to the podium, then I think scoring consistently is about the best Tsunoda can hope for. Either way, Red Bull's commitment to throwing drivers under the bus instead of fixing their own shit is rather impressive at this point, and not in a good way. Second, Haas is back, baby. I got a little worried after the abysmal performance in Australia, but never mind, Behrman and Ocon are very much back in business, and Behrman immediately got to show why he was so highly rated by Ferrari in the first place. While it still looks like the top 4 teams, or top 7 cars I suppose, are in a league of their own, with performances like this, Haas could find themselves in the battle for P5 in the Constructors, and I'd be all for that. And third, there was no way I could just ignore the Ferrari drama this weekend, from Hamilton dominating the sprint portion of the weekend to a disappointing Grand Prix and an even more disappointing double disqualification post-race. And of course, let's not forget the usual spicy team radio action. While the team often fills that comedic relief role on the grid, I still wanted to draw attention to the rather intense duel between Hamilton and Leclerc, who have so far taken turns running away from the other. Aside from McLaren, this is clearly the most interesting matchup on the grid, and one with huge implications for the future as well. I'll keep the IndyCar segment even shorter, primarily because I could only watch about half of the race thanks to the horrendous broadcast they put on, across multiple platforms as well. As always, if the broadcaster doesn't even care about the series, then why should we, after all? But it wouldn't be an IndyCar segment without some Alex Palou glazing. The Spaniard absolutely has to be in the conversation of not just the best driver in IndyCar, he could seriously be the best driver in the world right now, at least in some aspects. Don't get me wrong, I rank the likes of Verstappen and Hamilton higher, but the level of clinical execution from Palou never fails to impress. And unlike at St. Pete, he had to pull off some sweet racing moves on track as well this time, albeit with strategic advantages on his side, of course. Either way, paired with his remarkable consistency, which I suppose also largely comes down to his general smart approach to the race, it already feels like he might just get 3 in a row. And I'm not talking about race wins here. On the flip side, let's have a quick look at the current McLaren lineup, where Pato O'Ward had a great opportunity to make up for the forgettable season opener, as the team seemed to have a great car all weekend long, with Christian Lundgaard on the podium as well. This does bring up a question though. What about Nolan Siegel? Kit got a lot of hate last year for buying his way into the series before he was ready, but I'm on the record saying that I don't think his skills are as limited as his budget would maybe suggest. And he did have a solid weekend at St. Pete, only to get taken out on lap 1 through no fault of his own. Here though, he was visibly struggling, especially when compared to his 2 front-running teammates. This is technically still what I would consider his rookie season. He did only do a half schedule last year after all, but much like with Lawson in F1, the criticism will absolutely come quicker than for true rookies. But the bottom line is, don't write him off just yet. He may be loaded, but he can drive and he can drive well, and I do believe he will grow into the role eventually. Like I said, I wanted to keep the Indy segment short, so instead, let's talk about a series with a capable broadcaster in our quick weekly karting report. For this week's karting segment, we'll focus on the first round of the IAME Euro Series. In case you aren't familiar with this competition, I'd say it ranks somewhere right below the FIA Champions of the Future and WSK Series when we're talking about relevance for feeder series fans. For example, Fionn McLaughlin was one of the key players here over recent seasons. The Minis saw a couple of great runs from George Haas and Daniel Ferguson at the front, while Austin Newsted put in a sweet recovery drive to P7 after getting dumped from the front row at the start. I do want to give a quick shout out to Lorenzo Di Pietrantonio though. The Italian is normally at home in the WSK competitions. I don't remember seeing him in this series yet anyway, and he was immediately right at the front, part of the small lead group, and even got to the podium thanks to a post-race penalty for Matthias Breggio. It wasn't exactly the most competitive race of all time though, it has to be said. In the juniors, Riley Cranham was back on top, Jesse Phillips continuing to look like a proper threat again, but more importantly a bunch of big names roughed up or outright struggling. Most notably, Dan Allemann got spun out from P5. Yet another disappointing end to a good race for the Swiss rider, following up from his IAME Winter Cup outing. And slightly disappointing for me personally, Danny Babicek and Finlay Lyons were non-factors at the front as well. The seniors had a properly wet race to end the weekend, and while Matthias van der Kerkhoff put on a great show to win the race, I want to highlight eventual P6 Ruben Moya. I've talked about the Spaniard before as one of those great to watch senior drivers, and he proved it here by making up for an unfortunate weekend with an epic charge in tricky conditions all the way up to P2 and briefly even challenging for the win. Yes, he did get a front fairing penalty to drop back down, and yes, he also made a mistake near the end of the race, but it was a brilliant drive nonetheless, and really fun to watch as he was running some rather absurd wet lines compared to the rest of the grid. Also shout out to Zach Green for claiming P4 in his rookie seniors campaign. Unfortunately, last year's junior star Harrison Mackie suffered an early DNF. And that was already it for this week. Next week, we'll kick off the FIA portion of the American Junior Ladder, crown a champion in the Euro Cup 3 Winter Series, and finally get all the promising junior karters together for the Champions of the Future. But for now, it is your turn to drop all of your opinions down in the comments so we can get our lovely little discussion going. And otherwise, I thank you all for watching, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.